All right, Kansas. So I kind of want to dive into what you just brought up. We were talking about is living our yogic principles, right, and implementing them into our daily lives, into the action that we take uh, in the world, right? And you brought up that sometimes people can feel perhaps guilty about spending time doing yoga practices or going on retreats when we also sense that there's so much need to take action in the world to help make things better. So I'm curious, how you might respond to that if someone came to you and said, "Hi, I really want to do this, go on this retreat, but I feel that, I can't be doing it because it would be wasting time or something like that, or not utilizing time well enough."
Certainly. Yeah, I appreciate that. Before the conversation, we were speaking about there's such an awakening energy, I'd say, that we're all present to on the planet. And with the extreme influx of information that we receive through the internet and through all of these communities and networks and kind of micro groups and family systems, there's almost a sense of overwhelm of there's so many places that I want to help or support or that I feel need attention. How can we disengage? Or rather, the individual might inquire, how can one justify disengaging from that daily activity and really take a different rhythm and approach by going into a retreat setting. And the retreat setting is really giving ourselves the opportunity to connect and go deeper. And I find it's like dropping down the anchor. There's an idea that when the waves are really wild, we become a deep sea diver. When the turbulence is so, so big, how do we find that inner stillness? And that's really how we find the equilibrium and navigate through life. And so I have found through my life as a mother, my life as an international traveler and equestrian, that that will never stop. There's always things that will command our attention. Life will constantly be throwing things that seem very, very challenging or important and vital at the moment. However, there is a real effectiveness, I would say, in order to giving ourselves permission to take that time to really drop in and allow ourselves to go to what resources us so that we can refill our batteries and then be that much more effective and have that clarity and really be more useful. Right. And so I think those who are attracted to any sense of mindfulness practices, how do we become centered in a world that constantly has that turbulence? There's also a natural desire to want to be a broadcast for humanity. There's a natural desire to want to connect, to help others, a genuine desire for service. And as caregivers, we're also needing to find that balance so that we are really actively engaged in things that help us attain wholeness, help us maintain our vitality, so that we're not um, choosing to put up blinders or avoid, but we're mindfully choosing when to engage and when to plug in and tap into our resources. And that's what I find that retreats can really do for us, even if it's just a weekend, even if it's a one day of sadhana. I just returned from another personal retreat, 7 days. And it was somewhat of a fast from the normal responsibilities and tasks, both family and professional, and unplugging from the phone, the weapon of mass distraction that we carry around in our hands all the time. Um, and as much as it seemed, there's a guilty term that you mentioned that we could say it's self indulgent. But to emerge out of that, it's like really clicking the refresh on our browser, our internal browser, and getting a chance to have that clarity so that when we emerge out of that, we're that much more effective. And it's not possible all the time, but when we can do that, when those moments do appear, to really check in inwardly with our inner guidance, perhaps this is something that is part of a bigger picture to create a strong foundation from there that we can also um, have a richness and a more stabilized way to respond to the world, to our families, to our colleagues, and our work environment.
Yeah. It seems to me it almost takes slowing down and looking at the situation fresh again and like, how does this really work? Yeah. How does change actually happen? Right. Um, if I go on a retreat, if I do these practices, what is the effect going to be? What is my belief around this? Right. Like that's what's interesting to me is like, is my belief that if I go on this retreat, it's only going to benefit myself? Is that my belief? Or is my belief that going on this retreat is not only going to benefit me, it's going to benefit everyone more, me and everyone. So I think it's pretty obvious that that is the only way actually
Mm.
to benefit others in the world is by improving this one being that I have the most direct control of. And when I get clear on that, when my belief changes, then perhaps it allows for uh, more time to be spent focused on that thing without questioning whether or not it's selfish and knowing for sure that it will do the most good.
Hmm. Well, what you're speaking to, I think also is really cool is to understand the distinction of what motivates us, right?
Mm.
So if our motivation is really to find greater wholeness, then anytime we make a choice for that for what seems to be just ourselves on a personal, individual level, it actually is a choice that everybody as a collective can benefit from. And that when we choose to really give ourselves that pause for mindfulness to really honor the intuition that's coming from inside, as opposed to just pleasing some external metric or pleasing some sort of imaginary ideal or expectation, then choosing to honor ourselves actually becomes that act of service. And everything that we do, whether it's in the way that we prepare our meal, in the way that we go through our responsibilities and obligations, or the way that we will carve out with dedication and discipline a 1 hour sadhana. And maybe that consists of some movement, asana, hatha yoga, or maybe it consists of mindfulness and meditation, or maybe it consists of a walk, or perhaps even just a call, a check in to a loved one who might be needing some support, whatever that is for the individual in the moment, responding to the moment. Those small acts end up really rippling out. I believe this is what we're seeing. We're all connected in the collective.
Mm.
And so there is no insignificant choice. Um, those of your listeners who might explore a little bit more know that the reason that we're talking together is because I get to come to Yogaville to be immersed in that beautiful ashram environment and share some of my passion, which is I'm a lifelong equestrian. And so the union of yoga has been an interspecies dynamic that I've been privileged to, I guess, embody and live. But then also, I've become a heart math practitioner and studied with the Institute of Heart Math for about 2 decades. And what we're seeing is real evidence based science now that understands when one individual is maintaining coherence. And coherence is really looked at as synchronization or an inner alignment, being able to stabilize in that heart space. That actually has a measurable effect, not just on our immediate surroundings, but in the greater environment at large. And the horses that I've been privileged to spend so much time with and learn from as being representatives of nature, and for me to practice the nonverbal energetics of communication. They teach me about energy. They're really like that original biofeedback. And all of nature is always responding to us. But the horses are these big, beautiful animals. And so we start to notice that even the way that their body is positioned, their body language, their breath, we all become attuned to. So when two beings are in relation with each other, we can start to notice how our field is impacting another individual, right? And that's just a symbol for seeing this is happening on a grand scale beyond what our visual senses can perceive, beyond what we perceive and receive in the auditory sense, but within the non physical domain. There's so much richness there. And the contributions that we make, even small ones, they might seem insignificant, can really be powerful moments to serve all times.
Yeah, I love to hear you talk about this because um, it was a very profound shift in my life. I mean, becoming aware of what you're talking about, that uh, how I am experiencing internally affects the external world, even if it's in a very small amount. It's rippling out, that we are connected to each other, and that's the essence of yoga. And I'm curious for you, when knowing, because it sounds also like you're grounded in this, like there's no doubt that how you're feeling inside has an effect on the horse, other people around you, all of that, right? So considering that, how do you respond to yourself if, say, fear, anger, more negative emotions come through, and you see, oh my gosh, this is here, and not only is it affecting me, it's also spreading out beyond me. What do you do in those moments?
Mhm. Well, I think this is what all of us as a human species are discovering, right? That's a process of learning, because we'll develop a certain capacity in situations, and then we still get stretched. And I'm constantly being stretched as life continues on its merry accelerator way. And I would say that as someone who works around livestock and in live situations, it's almost a survival mechanism. And we develop these skills of how to maintain um, not just concentration or focused or grounded centeredness in the midst of something that could very quickly become dangerous, right? So if we become too reactive, if I'm in a situation where I'm around a horse and I lose my composure, that sends out a message to the horse that they might not be safe within my presence, and so they'll choose to remove themselves from the environment and could move away. They can move away quickly, right? So my energy ends up pushing that away. This happens on small, subtle levels when we're just walking around with that kind of cloud around us. And then people can feel that tension in the room. There's an energetic sensitivity that we're aware of, and it can kind of push away the opportunity for connection, right? And so, what I've learned through some really beautiful heart math practices also is how to connect with breath. And breathwork practices are wide and varied and can be applied in many different situations. But we can even just focus this together now to add this mindfulness of breath with the heart focus. So bringing your attention away from the intellect, away from the mental capacities that we live in the mind so much. But just like you can shift your awareness to your diaphragm or to a place in your body that might have pain, I just invite you and all your listeners, anyone who's watching this, to begin to bring their awareness into the heart, to the chest area. And imagine that the breath is coming in through the heart and out through the heart. And with that mindfulness, imagine that your breath is a little bit slower and a little bit deeper than normal. And if it's helpful, you can also count to 5 as you breathe in and 5 as you breathe out. On this 1 minute shift to the heart, what are you noticing, Abby?
I think joy is the first thing, that just a sense of contentment, happiness. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for some of us, it might not be right away that renewing feeling. what you spoke about, negative emotions, we might become aware that actually I'm feeling really activated right now, perhaps with fear. But that present acknowledgement, that being authentic is a coherent response.
Mm.
So it's not always going to tap into the wellspring of just bliss and joy. That might not be available to each individual at any given time. But the first step is to just become present and aware, to start to do this biohack where we can have an even inhale and an exhale that start to regulate the autonomic nervous system. And then from there, we can be aware of, oh, perhaps there's something that I'm noticing that is creating a dissonance, an energetic um, feedback. And perhaps I can shift myself into an awareness of what is here in this present moment, activating a sense of gratitude, connecting to what I care about, noticing that's beautiful in the world and in the environment around. Those are all ways that we can consciously train our physiology to recognize the safety that may be present. And that can give a little bit of a relief in a stressful moment. And that's a palpable effect or a measurable effect that also, when I'm working with horses, they'll also start to co regulate and we begin to coordinate and really synchronize together. That's when we get into the zone. That's when we get compatible. You can actually read that the heart rhythms become organized and smooth and that they mirror the other beings that are present. So that's a way that our coherence can actually be felt to the other individuals that are around who may not even be practicing a breath practice, a mindfulness practice, but that's our impact. That's how it goes.
Mm. Uh, Yep. Exploring this, especially let's say with horses, mm, and you see how your state of being can affect them, right? And you experience that, over and over again, so that it becomes undeniable, right? And then obvious that my state of being is affecting the horse or another person, right? I wonder then, does that mm, create a sense of responsibility almost that might not have existed before?
I love you diving deep into these questions. I think that's so appropriate for us now because when we've been on this path for a long time, it's almost impossible to not have that. Oh my gosh, now I'm responsible for every bit of energy that I'm putting out there. And then that can be this double-edged sword that we use, to create more um, fear, really, and self-judgment. And I think the biggest superpower that we can give both to ourselves and to each other is really compassion. You know, the power of the heart to broadcast different frequencies. Each emotion that we have actually has a unique like key signature. The spectra analysis can be measured now up to like 70 to 80% accuracy of what emotion an individual is feeling. So when you say you're radiating love and joy, that has a little bit of a different picture to it, that like a unique fingerprint, if you will, than the feeling of compassion or that of forgiveness, gratitude. They all have a little bit of a unique sound, right? So when we can really tune into compassion, I believe that that in and of itself can be such um, it ameliorates the energies of self-judgment, of that striving, that wanting to get it right, wanting to do it perfectly. And also the true care behind it, identifying that that comes from a place of really wanting to have an authentic, positive contribution to the environment around us. These are all things that I learned through trial and error. Probably I can rewind just in this week. There's been many times where I've felt like, oh my gosh, I really want to make sure that I'm broadcasting the highest, purest, most coherent sense of heart and gratitude and compassion. And then I make a mistake. Like we're human, right? So we're going to continually be recalibrating. And just like you do a balance posture in yoga, you can't learn how to bring yourself back into center unless you know what it's like to be off center. And in pulling ourselves back into alignment, we build the muscles, we build the capacity to be able to hold that for a little bit longer with ease and with confidence that we can actually weather through that, 30-minute hold or through that cycle of 5 breaths. And really allowing, giving ourselves, this is another heart math term, compassionate latitude for the process itself. Because if we're not able to notice what that feels like inside us, we might have more judgment also to others. But when we're also in the same boat as everyone, then that gives that understanding that we're all in this human family and everybody's at different, um, I don't want to say, I'm with really trying to hesitate and say different levels of evolutionary growth and process because it makes it seem as though people are higher than
Mhm.
another. But it's like Mother Nature likes variety. I studied equine guided education with another wonderful mentor of mine named Ariana, who's out in California with Skyhorse Academy. And Mother Nature, if you look at, a rainforest and the biodiversity that is present there, everybody's different. We all have different expressions. We all have different tendencies and growth. In the yoga retreat that I just mentioned, they talked about the questioning of why are there 33 million Hindu gods? Well, it's because there's 33 million different types of human temperament. And if you're attracted to a masculine quality, then you can choose something that is very still and meditative, a sadhak like Lord Shiva, or perhaps something that's more playful like Lord Krishna, or perhaps on the feminine, divine feminine, something that's more fierce like Kali or Durga, or the softer feminine qualities like Lakshmi or Saraswati. And then you also have animal deities. So there's so many different temperaments. And to really have that compassion and understanding that there's no right or wrong way, there's just different ways to get to this greater capacity to accept all aspects of life, of consciousness. I mean, it's so much bigger than we can really even put into a 30-minute podcast or, a book, right? That's you look at the Srimad Bhagavatam and how all of these tales just give us little tiny facets into this truth, right? We're all trying to seek and get little aspects of it. They're just nuggets to help unlock different keys in each individual's consciousness. And so looking at it from that perspective of like, okay, I can be compassionate with myself. There's 1,000 different ways to unfold. I'm going to be constantly challenged and keep recalibrating and keep growing. Like a forest will never stop. Life cannot stop but continue to transform. And I think the beauty of the journey in that, giving ourselves that love and just letting us give us permission to, open our hearts more, keep opening, keep revealing more light.
You're reminding me of an experience I had last night. Actually, I was over at a friend's, and there was a gathering of a bunch of people, and they hosted a open mic night, and people were playing different pieces, and one person was very talented. After he finished playing, he said, "I've been working with this new student, and he's going to come up here next and perform for the first time in front of other people." Uh, and the child's about 9 years old and gets up and starts performing and is playing absolutely beautifully. You know? And after a few minutes, he makes a mistake. And he makes a mistake, and all of a sudden, that's it. And he sits there and then he puts his hands in front of his face and he gets up and he just walks out of the room with his hands covering his face, and leaves. And I think all of us there, really felt for him. And we were probably all totally understanding that look, you did great. This is your first time ever performing like what you're talking about. This takes practice. This is a process. Like that's that's amazing. But I was considering, why he was so upset. right? And my guess is, I could be totally wrong, but my guess is that it had something to do with the expectations he had for himself, that he wanted to be perfect. You know, he was expecting to get up there and go through the entire thing and just have that stamp of perfection, you know?
Mhm.
And then he didn't do that. So he was pretty broken up about it. But I'm wondering how common that is. How many of us are expecting such a high level from ourselves for the perfection, as opposed to just like what you're talking about, just realizing this is a process, you know, and we misstep and we learn, and that's how we learn, and that's how we grow, and not taking ourselves so seriously or what we're doing so seriously. Like, how important is that?
Mm. Well, I think what you're speaking to is we have this desire for excellence. And again, like when we really get to our core values, like the desire for excellence is healthy and we can keep striving toward that. However, the the contraction and tension that comes from the expectation of it looking a certain way can be crippling. And the performance anxiety that is associated with is something I'm really familiar with because I spent a I started out as a childhood performer basically since I was like 11 years old, and we did have to be perfect. We had to execute every bit of choreography. We had to we're basically presenting a professional level of paid entertainment, and you don't go out there to make a mistake. Just like when you go and listen to a philharmonic, everything is beautiful. And there's a massive amount of rehearsal that goes into that. However, one thing that I've learned as I became older, stepping out on stage, is this idea of perfection because I would still navigate through my own fear, self judgment, critical anxiety that was unhealthy. I go out there and go do a great show, but the stress from before, the tension around before for the days at the advent of it was really unhealthy. And it took me a while to unwind that entanglement in my physiology and my programming, I would say, to understanding that it's really the feelings that we're seeking afterward. So when you complete something perfectly, whether you get a great score on a test, maybe you ace. I have a friend of mine who just aced a math exam at Harvard. That's not an easy thing, but she did it. Like I would never be able to do such a thing, right? But it's the feeling that you want on the other side of it, the feeling perhaps of achievement or contentment, like you named at the beginning when you're recognizing and connecting with your own heart, right? So oftentimes we're seeking to have approval. Oftentimes we really just want to have some sort of validation. And if we can identify, again, what is the motivation behind it? What are we really seeking from that? And then connect with, can we also give that to ourselves right here in this moment? And then we can be quick to the game of how um, we might be caught unaware. We're a little bit more prepared, if that makes sense, to notice, okay, if I am putting too much expectations on myself, it's because I really want to feel accepted by this community, this room. And if this individual was able to kind of open their eyes and maybe make eye contact with the love that had been in that space, it
Mm.
sounds like there was compassion from the other people who were there. Then he could have received something, or he or she could have really received something that would be also a point of contact for each of you who had been present. So, what I'm trying to gather is that when we give ourselves those moments to feel seen, that it actually contributes again to all of our learning,
Mm.
right? And I think it's something again that we're starting to understand. Like the idea for excellence is something that we don't want to let go of. But there's been a lot of studies that really show a reassuring inner narrative is really beneficial as opposed to the condemning one, the critical one. And that can actually shut down our learning center. It shut down our capacity to communicate well, our social engagement. And when we can remain open and do practices that really keep us in our hearts, that give us that coherent awareness, then that allows us to actually receive what is around in our environment as opposed to shutting down all of our perceptions and our sensory awareness. Because we really go into that state of withdrawal. So I often say it's kind of like an anemone in the ocean that is open and available, and then it just closes off
Mm.
until it feels safe enough to emerge.
So staying open.
Yeah. Staying open to ourselves and to, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of hurt there. Oftentimes we want to protect, right? So when we
Mm.
withdraw, it's because we're afraid that the world itself has shown to be really painful in a lot of ways. I think that social media and kind of the ability to see everybody's opinion instantly can sometimes feel really painful. My daughter, for example, is an artist, and I know that right now she's navigating through, gosh, am I really that good? Because I see so many great artists. So maybe it's not up to par when you see all of these things to compare it to. But again, just redirecting ourselves into what is the unique expression that wants to come through at that moment. That compassionate understanding for everybody is this really um, unique painting, masterpiece, if you will, a constellation of so many different experiences, and to really allow ourselves to create that felt sense of safety, security, um, that love, really, that wants to be expressed. That how that we can do that not just for ourselves, but for our community, for each other. I think that
Mm.
that's really where our work is right now as a collective.
Hmm. Do you think focusing on how others are perceiving me gets in the way of that?
I think when we are looking at the external metric,
Mm.
that it can definitely create a distortion sometimes. And when we can understand again, what's the most motivation behind it? Are we looking for approval? Are we looking for validation? Are we looking for love? Are we feeling someone else's judgment? Because that's a palpable sense. There might actually be real, like a critical nature. And we can notice, like, oh, okay, why am I feeling this way? Oh, this other person has pretty high expectations. Maybe I'm going to voice that. Maybe I'm in a safe enough place where I can actually identify and voice that. Or perhaps the appropriate action is to breathe compassion for ourselves and attend to that in a more personal way, perhaps later when we're removed from that particular environment. But I think that just to be able to track and notice is really the first step, right? Because oftentimes we're just operating without that high level of attunement.
Mm.
And nowadays we are given so many tools and so much information in a way that can feel overwhelming. Like, oh, like what you brought forth at the beginning of the call. Okay, I have to be responsible for my energy, what I'm bringing into the field. Oh no, I don't like what I'm putting into the field right now.
Mm.
Okay, where's that coming from? Maybe we picked up that afterness from another experience. It can be relevant. I'm reminded of my work and being with many different horses. And I'd say that I went through my own questioning of how can I be in right relationship within the equine industry to have this. There's a very strong dominant subordinate quality that has existed. This idea that we train the animal and that we want them to do our bidding. And when I really started to step into the equine guided education, I questioned that relationship because it was more of a passive experience of, again, looking at the horse as a representative of nature that shows this biofeedback. It's giving me information and reflecting back the energies, okay, that I'm experiencing. So as I came back into the professional world, because that's my industry of working with horses, I would have a much greater sense of um, how I could contribute in a beneficial presence, both into the stable, even though nobody else really knew what I guess, my intentions were. But I wasn't just going through the exercises of taking a horse into a training situation, I really was making sure that we were connecting on a soul to soul level first, that the energetics of, consent and permission and cooperation and harmony, that those heart connections, that coherent relationship was established first. Then I could step into a partnership that was more of an invitation, like, let's dance together. How do you feel about this? Okay, do you feel about it this way? Can we dance this way? Just like you ask permission as a yoga instructor, is it okay if I put my hands on you to help you move into alignment? Right? We ask permission for that. And some people are comfortable and some people are allowed to say no. And that's fine. And then how can we really, sometimes, how can we offer support in an energetic hold, an energetic hug, or perhaps through our verbal cues to create another level of alignment, of inner alignment? That's really the goal as a facilitator, right? And so the same thing I'm noticing when I was in this work environment and I have to work with several different horses throughout the day, there might be an interaction that I would carry that I really wanted to make sure I cleared and reset, that I'm not bringing that into my next
Mm.
session, if that makes sense. Right. So to be able to really have that awareness. Okay, am I carrying something from the past? Am I still thinking of projecting something into the future? Or am I really here present with this moment, this interaction, this space, these humans who are here, these other species that may be present? And using all of that to help ground into the power of now.
Yes. Mm. Yeah. Did you have specific ways that you do that for yourself to clear and come back to the now?
Exactly what we started with in that heart focused breathing. That's the cornerstone
Mm.
of the heart math techniques, really coming in and consciously withdrawing again. We spend so much time strategizing, trying to create kind of a mental picture, visualizing what we might be creating. But the heart's power to really magnetize and to move away from that intellect is something that I have found that when I consciously redirect into my inner voice, that is what helps bring me into the now, being aware and noticing any somatic awareness. So when I am bringing um, a deliberate intention to breathe in through the heart and out through the heart and connecting with a renewing feeling such as appreciation or care, when I can really find something that, like, what is my true care? Why am I here right now? Oh, that's right. I'm here because I want to share the joy that I have of yoga, of union, of um, of the human experience and how it helps us grow. Like, that's why I'm here. That's what I get excited about. And that can take me back into the essence of purpose. It can help recalibrate us into that intuitive feeling that we're dancing with something that is more alive as opposed to what's stagnant, that what stories might be, taking off their own or taking off on their own in the head, if that makes sense. The grounding practices that I also do before I even step into a room or into a meeting are really about feeling into and getting into the body, right? So a lot of people might have a sadhana spiritual practice routines that they do before they start their day, before they get out of bed, before they go into work. And so I certainly have found a lot of value in chanting. I like to, recite the repetition of a mantra, and I believe that the sounds, we're all vibrational beings and we're living in a vibratory universe. And so those sounds unlock different codes and they can really help also focus our attention on something that is supportive, as opposed to, again, letting the mind run away like the monkey that it does, jumping from tree to tree and time zone to time zone and past and future. It's so fast, right? They say there's nothing faster than the speed of light, but no, the thinking mind is faster than anything.
Mm.
Right? We can create things so quickly. And that tendency to use the mind is really developed in society, right? So we exist so much in the analytical, but to use it in a proactive way to integrate and activate our inner knowing, our inner guidance system. For me, and what I've learned is to really like that the seat of the soul is right here. And when I move myself into heart centered awareness, then that helps me become aware of the present moment and disengage. It's like I can just picture everything that is in the mental landscape start to lose its power and its dominance. And then we move into more of that co-creative aspect with the now, what is here, not imagining something for the future or rehashing something from the past.
Mm. Have you noticed uh, this ability to strengthen over time with practice? That at first, starting to practice something like this of mm, tuning into the body, tuning into the heart, this inner knowing. If maybe I haven't done it in a long time, that it can be challenging. But has your experience been that the more that you practice, it becomes kind of a faster and easier transition?
Absolutely. That we can build our capacity, we build our muscle capacity by starting with small weights and then lifting up a little bit more. I've had the beauty of being in this female form and giving birth to two children. And that's taken me out of my normal physical routine a couple times significantly. I was a very athletic equestrian acrobat, somewhat of gymnastics. And then I didn't do any real yoga or practice for a long time. I mean, I could do a bridge, a back bend on a galloping horse, but then I would do nothing for it seemed like years. But that investment was never wasted, and it still helped me create a reference point to go back to. But I had to start just like anybody else to slowly increase my capacity, and with practice, I'm now I will honestly say I'm proud to be in my, um, 5th decade on this planet, and I am so, like, tickled and delighted to say that the investment that we have is timeless. I can come back and I can start over again and really
Mm.
build that capacity. So a year ago, I started really getting deeper into a sincere hatha yoga practice once more to prepare for something called the Gaucho Derby, which was an equestrian expedition out in the Patagonia where we did 430 miles horseback with 7 different horses. And, partnering with those horses every day. And then we would ride about 40 to 60 miles a day in um, wilderness terrain. And in order to prepare for that, I started really doing a more committed yoga practice again. I'd been healthy and doing hikes and always had some stretching and was just naturally somebody who didn't carry as much resistance. But now I was doing a real strong practice daily. And it's something that I've kept and maintained. And in the beginning, it was harder to hold some of these asanas, and in my mind, I thought, gosh, well, I could do this, a few years ago, and it's harder now. But with practice, it became more familiar and it became more comfortable. And then it actually became something that I was really seeking and then could even build more confidence with it. And it's the same thing with our attention. Wherever we put our attention, that becomes kind of like a default setting. And we're constantly able with practice, recalibrate where is our attention going? What can our new response be to a stressor that might be in our environment? Whether it's an individual that we know, oh, if we have some history here, how can I create a new response? Or perhaps it's something that, when you get that triggering email, why does it Why is it that we respond to it like a saber-toothed tiger is chasing after us, right? We get reactive, like, oh my gosh, either it's a financial consideration or maybe you have somebody who's in a health crisis. Those are real moments. They affect our physiology. We feel that can affect our heart rate, it can affect our hormonal response. There's all of these um, interdependent systems that are taking place. But with practice, again, we can start to notice with awareness how our bodies respond. And then we can start to retrain new ways of being to give ourselves healthy habits so that we can minimize the stress, the wear and tear on our energy, and be able to respond more effectively in a way um, that we feel like we're meeting the needs, but we also feel like we're not draining ourselves and that we are continuing to embody, like we said at the very beginning of this call, how are we embodying those principles that we're learning about? Marianne Williams says the time for, um, Marianne Williamson had said that the time for data collection is over. Or another speaker that I appreciate, Dr. Michael Beckwith, would say that spiritual information without implementation and activation can lead to constipation, right? We got to apply it. So when it's stuck in our heads and it's just going in theoretical, how do we actually integrate that, embody it, and live those principles? And through practice, we get a chance to, okay, this is what that passage, that inspiring book, that inspiring podcast, that's what it means. Now I'm living it. And then it's actually kind of fun. Like I get to use these tools that I've been that I believe in, that I want to have purposeful, meaningful relationship with.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder about how can I apply things, more regularly. Um, and it seems to me that what prevents me from doing it the most maybe is is a rigidity and is taking myself really seriously of already defining myself. I am this, I am that. And like those things get in the way of me being inspired again and then applying that inspiration and having fun with it all. Really. Like uh, I heard you talking about this too, like the importance of play. Like I just told my daughter the other day for the first time, and this is one of the philosophies that I kind of live by, basic principles, is that like this is all a game. I see nothing wrong with looking at life like it's a game. Like I am this character, I am this being, and I get to move him about, where I choose, and that's really fun, and in that way, I think applying all of these teachings, all of this data becomes much easier, right? If I'm taking myself lightly in this way that I am just this character, yes, as opposed to this thing that I'm really trying to defend and be better than other people and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about it, your whole energy just lightens up, right? And we feel that
Yeah.
levity that comes with it. When we're playful, there's less self-consciousness, right? Oftentimes when people even talk about their equestrian journey and they've been with horses when they're a kid, they're not trying to do it right. They're not trying to do it to competition. They're just doing it because they love it and it's fun. And so how can we do that with the rest of life? We've learned so much that it can create that rigidity that you speak of, trying to conform or trying to get things perfect and trying to execute things. Just the word try gets repeated. Like there's effort required and assigned to it. But when we look at it with the attitude of curiosity, of exploration, of discovery, then all of a sudden that gives us a little bit more of a wide berth, if you will, to kind of navigate. It's like a boat will have its end point, its harbor, but it's always going to be, back and forth as it finally makes it out there. So just to understand that we're always going to be in that dance. I was at a gathering and we talked about there's no balance, only balancing. And if
Mhm.
you're standing in a posture on one foot, there's always this slight subtle muscle calibration that's taking place. It's a constant. There's no true, in a way, stillness. There is an inner stillness, but we are physical beings existing in a three-dimensional world. And yet we also are aware of these other energies that are existing around us in different dimensions. And so it's this, like you said, it's a cool game because there's certain things that we're learning about through instrumentation, like what else is there in the quantum field, and that's like fun and get curious about it. How can we look at? They say that the entire universe is Lord Krishna's play, that divine Leela, right,
Mm.
is said often in Vedic scriptures. And so if we look at it like that, like, huh, well, what does that what other possibilities does that invite? What's that an invitation for? And it brings up the scent of you talked about the openness. And really when we look at the nervous system, when things contract, when our blood vessels contract and we get and triggered basically in that fight or flight response, first step is just noticing it. And then we can start to soothe and open up and create that levity. What that is, that openness is actually the opening of our blood vessels that's allowing more circulation, that's allowing more oxygenation, more prana to come through. Then we can access this problem solving. It opens up our intuitive capacity, and we can also engage socially in a whole different way.
Mm.
So that's like that inner world is really reflective of how we perceive the world around us. So when you are tapping into your play, that means that you have the perspective of a playful attitude that you get to those are you're putting your playful sunglasses on, those rose tinted glasses. And this isn't to say that, we talked at the beginning, people can feel guilty for putting on those rose tinted glasses and it's as though you're tuning out negativity, right? And so it becomes this dance, if you will. We're living in this paradox of how do we create a sober, mindful filter to be able to respond to that which needs our care and attention in a mindful way, but also to not allow things to, grip a heavy hold that inhibits our capacity to remain open, loving, heart centered.
Do you think that that some people might feel a responsibility to be miserable as a response to the suffering that's happening in the world?
I think what you're speaking to can be rephrased in many different ways. So I do believe that there's a human common response that our worry is justified. That if we don't worry or care so much to the point that it actually is an effort, that somehow it's not enough. And so therefore it seems to validate this sense of intense um, care. Really, what's behind it is care. And
Mm.
again, I'll just keep referring to, as a heart math trainer, there's these different terms that I find are really useful to describe the feeling of overcare when we've gone like too far over into the calibration of straining to help. That's where the experience of compassion fatigue, being burnt out and almost feeling hopeless because our care can't be effective. That's where we know it's impacting our own physiology in a negative way, and therefore that contribution to the fear field is not um, as effective as we would really hope it to be. But when we're aligned with our true care, that actually renews us. That actually
Mm.
feels supportive. It gives us energy. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, there are many people who felt this call to service. I mean, my daughter was engaged in how she could reach out to other loved ones who might feel isolated and really wanting to find ways to connect in a meaningful way. And everybody found enthusiasm with that. And at the same time, when it draws out over a long period, then we have to find new ways to resource ourselves to stay connected so that it doesn't actually end up becoming a drain. And I think it's really an important self-awareness that, you know, there's so many things that people can feel emotionally um, activated by and connected to. And it's become skillful means to be aware when we get drawn too far out into something that actually awakens, anger in us, or that actually creates a response that, again, is pulling us out of center. And we can notice that very simply by saying, okay, is this draining me over time? Am I spending a lot of energy and attention on wishing for this to be another way? Or how can I really connect with sending my heart and my compassion into a way that's effective and helpful in a more supportive way?
Yeah, I think sometimes it appears that we're handcuffed by our past selves as something that maybe was alive before that is not alive in this present moment. I heard you talking about how to pay attention to ourselves, right? And I love what you said in terms of balancing. That there's no balance; there's only balancing, and that feels totally true. I love that. So it's like in this spark of action, often to do something for others. Let's say, you know, that's very real, and that feels very right in the moment. But it's not only that moment of listening to myself, right? It's every moment listening to myself. Like what is authentic now? What is authentic now? What is authentic now? Right? And it could be very different than the way it was even just a few moments ago. Right. And so that can be confusing. Right.
Absolutely. I think we're living in like that paradox. What we planned for 5 years ago, everybody's looking at it being totally different, or even 5 months ago, looking at the reality that we have. And that agility, I think that we train ourselves as
Mm.
yogis to be able to be agile in the moment, to be able to be kind of like these ninjas that are out in the world, being able to dance very quickly and pivot to what is responding to the immediate need, what is appropriate in the moment. And that is actually, such a good sign of a balanced nervous system, to be able to move quickly, to be able to strategize, to be able to run fast. That's when we want that sympathetic activation. But also the parasympathetic response, being able to relax and drop in and perhaps have some moment of meditation in the midst of maybe an airport or some chaos that's going along, as opposed to getting swept up in the current of um, chaos, right? And crisis. How can we be that first responder that actually has that state of active calm, right? I'm getting the image as I talk about that of like Lord Shiva with his eyes closed in the midst of this dynamic universe that's constantly in a state of involution, evolution, creation, and destruction, but still maintaining that equipoise, and really finding that in the face of all situations, right?
Yeah. The only answer that comes to me for how to do that is simple practice. Simple but not easy. Just practice. Just keep practicing doing that. That's it, right?
Absolutely. Practice and then being compassionate with ourselves and with each other as we're in the process of refinement.
And that's a practice too. Practicing compassion. It
Absolutely.
it has
And
no
I
bounds.
think our great human family, you mentioned, for those who are really looking at as we come back as souls, our whole human family has an experience of the past. And any gains that we make as individuals is really impacting the collective. So it's this journey that is so diverse and so vast. It's like exponentially bigger than just these individual, seemingly separate movements, but really as a collective, how we bring that practice that we're all kind of midwifing each other into the new world that is really being created moment to moment. I mean, it is such a dynamic universe that is unfolding. I mean, we need just look at astronomy and what we're learning about the universe to see the microcosm, the macrocosm. There's so many symbols within our lives that are really how this is looking at a bigger scale. And that gives us, I think, not only humility for the process, but again, going back into that playful excitement, like this is watching the most incredible story unfold in front of our eyes. And to really be enlivened by that and really get excited about the day, about how this is how we can really continue to show up, on the mat, show up for each other, show up for ourselves as individuals, as these souls that are really in a process of evolution to our highest best selves.
And the you've mentioned heart math a few times now. Can you share a bit about what heart math is?
Absolutely. I mean, I think some people might be familiar with it because it's about 30 years ago that HeartMath showed up on the map as an institute, really studying how our emotions affect our physiology. And now this is really becoming, common knowledge. But it's really hyper focused on our emotional landscape and the effect of our emotions on our heart rate variability. And so, what that body of research, continues to, I guess, prove is the idea that the energetic world is very real and again dynamic, but that we don't have to wait to be at cause for just receiving kind of the feedback and how do you say, when we are subject to an external influence, but we can actually be co creators with our environment, that we can really broadcast a coherent field environment. I've talked about it a lot. The heart itself is an electromagnetic organ that's always broadcasting and transmitting. So we have this unique field environment around us that's gathering information and it's also giving. So then it becomes um, part of our, as scientists, the rishis that brought down the Vedic knowledge were really scientists. And so, as individual scientists, what can we attune ourselves to and begin to broadcast that out into the field? How can we be creators with our heart energy to notice that the coherence, again, that organization, when we tap into a renewing energy that you've mentioned, that playful humor brings us into the heart, gratitude brings us into the heart. It's one of the most easily accessible emotions, is really just appreciation or connecting to what we care about. That coherent response starts to create a measurable effect on our physiology, where over 1,000 different chemical reactions begin to start to organize. It improves our immune system, our hormonal response. DHEA starts to function. Our cortisol levels will start to balance and go down. And basically, we're creating a harmonization within our own human instrument, our physical body, as well as we're harmonizing with the natural world around us. So this whole body of research is not just looking at the individual system, but also the global collective. So I invite those who are interested and want to do a deeper dive to look at heartmath.org, where there's tons of peer-reviewed evidence-based articles and research, as well as the Global Coherence Initiative, which is really measuring the impact that individuals have on the Earth's resonance, how we can really harmonize with the natural environment. It's basically proving the idea that we're all connected, which is what really, ancient systems, be it the Kabbalah or be it, yogic philosophies, they're all saying that we are all connected to this oneness. And I love seeing it's exciting to get the research now to help
Mm.
give it language and understanding for all of us. This that has been kind of conceptual. And now it helps us understand, like, why is that working? Oh, okay. There's actually a measurable response when we get into alignment with ourselves and with each other.
And so do you believe that human beings are nature and that it's important to to know that?
Well, there's nothing that is not. coming from the same organic materials. We can label something as organic and non-organic, but basically everything there's nothing that could ever be created or destroyed. All of matter and energy is all right here. So what our human bodies are created by is of the earth. The same elements that make up the trees, the same air and water particles have been on this planet and part of the universe for aeons. So even though we have these kind of mammalian systems, we're all animals, we have an animal body, it responds. We also have this other layer of dimensionality that is human consciousness that's unique. And every being has consciousness. And it's not just relegated to, mammals, right? It's every bit of life. There is, the First Nations would also acknowledge that the stone people, those things that we feel that are lifeless, all have, they're all connected to the same natural world. They all have resonance. And again, when we're looking at it as in terms of vibrations, there's so much space, there's so much vastness, and yet we're all interconnected into this web of reality. There's nothing that is separate from you and I, and yet everything is infinitely beautiful in its complexity, and it all looks so different, right? But our DNA between you and I is 99.9% identical. Just when you wrap your head around that, it's this 1%, the subtle 0.1% that has all of our differences. And we really tend to focus on these differences. But ultimately, the fabric of the universe is made up of a lot of similarities. And the more we can acknowledge that, I believe, is also a way to, it's another portal. It's something else that creates that foundation of compassion and kindness and generosity that we really want to, again, embody and walk the talk of those philosophies in our daily life.
Mm. Yeah. It seems that maybe there's, two different ways of getting information. One is, listening to what someone else says or reading it or whatever. The other is direct perception, right? And I wonder how common the direct perception is, and if that's really the thing to mm, focus on more, uh, and if it isn't necessarily common, or it is common to doubt my direct perception. Like, I'm not a professional, I'm not a scientist. Like, I'm in no position to to believe my direct perception. I should listen to some authorities, and therefore maybe it's possible to almost live your life based on what the authority is telling you, as opposed to direct perception.
Mm, yeah, I think what you're talking to has a lot to do with trust, right? So, how do we really trust ourselves and our own perception? Um, our human senses can often be imperfect, and they change based on whether or not we're in a survival mode or whether we're actually optimized and in a coherent place. When we're remaining open, then our perceptions are different than when we're in a triggered response or carrying over and operating from a baseline that may be impacted by other events, right? That can color our awareness. So it can cause us to have self doubt. And there may be coping strategies that have been implemented from trauma responses that also have a very real impact on our ability to trust ourselves or to hear that inner guidance. It's certainly something that I've been through to develop that trust. I had the narrative, I'm not really intuitive, I don't hear these voices. But when you say there's two types of information, the information that we get from others and the information that we get through experience, I would classify that also into there's the external information and the internal information.
Hmm.
And there's that what we get through lived experience, but we can also begin to start to turn inward and take those pauses more frequently, to not wait for like the experience to almost kind of happen. That's kind of slow, but to go inward and actually check in with our inner guidance that can create a more, um, a clearer pathway, if you will, to our inner voice. It's like when you walk into a field that has filled with weeds, and you walk on it many times, then the path becomes more clear. And to have that reflex of going inward to be able to listen to that inner voice, listen to our inner guidance. Again, that's something that happens with practice. And we don't have to even wait for experience to start to tap into inner information and get those downloads. That's what the rishis were doing. That's what's possible in the human capacity. And again, we get so transfixed. The world is so beautiful. We want to open our eyes and see it and go out and live it and experience it. And at the same time, I think I don't want to devalue the beauty of our human family as being mirrors, and reflectors to give us feedback. Certainly having coaches, having mentors, having guides, teachers, parents, loved ones, family members. Those are all important, wise counsel. It's a way that our spirit speaks to us through these other voices. When you said earlier that it's all a play that you get to be involved in, these characters are also created
Mm.
to help give us loving support, to help show us moments where we can give compassion to ourselves. Like the gentleman I keep thinking it was a male, and I'm not sure if it was male or female, this person who was singing and made a mistake.
It was a boy. Yeah, playing the
It
piano.
was a
Yeah.
boy. So this
Yeah.
boy created a reference point for you to come back to compassion for not only for yourself, but for those individuals who may be experiencing that. And that played a beautiful part and a reminder, right? So if we
Mm.
can look at everyone around us as, equine guided communication is that always look at the horse as a guide, first and foremost. I'm not teaching the horse anything. I'm there to learn from the horse how to partner from them. And then, widening that to the entire human family, the entire natural world. That when the, dragonfly lands on me, that is a message. When the human comes up and is either expressing something that they're maybe irritated with, okay, how can I really maintain that inner drishti, that inner focus on how to remain present and not go into perhaps a reactive state. Everybody around us becomes an opportunity as opposed to a distraction.
Mm. I love that.
It's a both and, right? Not the either or. There's inner and
Mm.
outer. We live in this polarity, but then at the same time, like I just feel like there's so many different ways to look at things, and that can constantly shift. And it may be appropriate for some time and be useful, and then we can also try on some other um, way of being, some other perception, and that can just add to our fullness, add to our versatility.
Mm. You've spoken about the variety of life and how much there is. I'm curious in regards to horses. Like, mm, are you ever amazed at the fact that like every single horse is different and unique?
Constantly, constantly. Yeah, they have as many, million different types of personalities as there are human souls. It's the same. I could have quit riding horses a long time ago due to, ideological ideas and my own rigidity. And I'm really glad I didn't because they're constantly teaching me more how to let go of what I think I know. Right. So I have been around them and in this industry for so many years. And then last year, I ended up in South America in a totally different culture and seeing those horses who are raised um, outside of, I guess, the North American and European model, but really where in terrain that there are no roads, there's no dirt bikes, there's no even foot trails. Like you really traverse it on a horse. And the horses have maintained this sense of dignity and self assuredness and confidence that I found to be completely unique compared to other horses that have been domesticated. And the ability to partner with that energy, that like full embodied wildness and the full spirit was so profound and really life changing, because it's like maybe you navigate a river or an ocean your entire life as a ship captain. And then all of a sudden you enter into a whole new different type of waters. And it just is like, I thought I knew everything I could about this. And now there's so much more to discover. And the humility with it about allowing myself to just be basically a passenger on the back of these mountain goat Pegasus that are
Mm.
flying over incredible terrain and not going around and around on flat surfaces, which is where a lot of people who do disciplines, they end up spending a lot of time. It's kind of like taking that yoga off the mat and onto a paddleboard or onto a granite rock, out into the natural world, instead of just on this very meticulous flat surface. It's like getting out into the game of life, not just for recreational interest, but really on kind of a survival mode, because basically, if we weren't able to partner and trust with each other, um, I wouldn't have a chance at survival.
Mm.
So that's a whole different level.
Yeah. You, y- yes, you mentioned a race. Was it a race that you did in South America? Is that what was it, a race or something else?
So interesting. I was invited very last minute. I became aware of something called the Gaucho Derby, which is known as it's known as the world's toughest horse race. And it's so much more than that. It's much more of a survival expedition, as the race organizers called it. It's a survival expedition on horseback. And so equestrian skills, horsemanship, that's just one element of it, but you carry all of your own gear. You're limited to 10 kilos of provisions, first aid, and survival equipment, your tent and your sleeping bag and things like that. And then you're facing the elements. So, hypothermia is possible from cold nights, but you can also have extreme drought and heat, rain, and all of those things. And this took place in Argentina. So Patagonia actually covers, both Chile and Argentina. It was in the Santa Cruz region. And initially, when I heard about it, I had a resistance to going. I had my own judgments, basically. It's like, I never want to get in a situation where I feel as though I could put my horse at risk. I don't want to be in a situation that I could be responsible for a negative impact on, that didn't feel like it was in right relationship or ethical alignment. And then when I learned a little bit more about it and I saw the support that is created and I learned more about, just how the organization of it unfolds, I thought, actually, I can be really clear about what my motivation is and participate. And really, above all else, I wanted to go to try and put these heart math tools, this
Mm.
animal communication, this real right relationship, ethical partnering and alignment into practice in a real kind of intense, unique setting. And so, how could I collaborate with the higher nature of each one of these beings? Um, in a compassionate way that really felt ethical and in alignment with interspecies communication. That was my motivation. And so I was like, okay, put on my hiking boots and head down there. And I connected for weeks with the horses energetically before I ever set foot in South America. And one of the things I really advocate now is connection is not based on proximity. We don't even have to be in the physical space with another being in order to connect with them, to send heart, to have communication. Because again, communication is only 70% word content and verbal audio. There's all of this other things that's happening that we can't even measure, as far as when someone really receives that mutual understanding. So I got to really practice that. And then when I was there in person, it felt as though there had been these old established, it was like an old friendship with each one of the equine guides that I met. And I really bowed to their higher nature. I bowed to their wisdom, where their hooves touch the earth as sacred. And I felt really privileged and honored and humble to be carried by them in that environment. And I made that really the cornerstone of how I completed that journey. I mean, it was a competition, but I wasn't in it to do any sort of speed. I was really in it to partner with that and connect with the horses in like that authentic way that humans and animals have partnered with over time. Now, there's a lot of people who might in the world have a controversial attitude about how humans are riding horses. Is that ethical? Is that really um, right relationship at this point?
Mm.
And I certainly believe that they have so much more to offer. But I also have heard, when we look at the Vedic scriptures and we see Lord Krishna who is driving the chariot, and all of those horses are really symbology for the senses. There's a gift in what the horsemanship relationship can teach humans about themselves, about how to do it ethically, about how to do it gently, about how to do it compassionately. There's absolutely an expression that is violent, and that offends me as well. And so I really advocate into education to understand that we can partner with these noble creatures, these beings, in a way that feels ethical. And maybe it doesn't involve writing. And for each individual, that's a moment to moment shift. Maybe I will evolve into another place where I don't feel like it is it is appropriate to be on the backs because there's so much beauty. I don't feel a desire or a need to do that anymore at all. I do it oftentimes because I'm asked to, like, can you help me find a balance with my animal? And so I'm asked to. I don't take the responsibility of having the guardianship of another being, meaning I don't own horses per se, but people do in the world, and that is already in motion. And so my relationship to it is, how can I help be an intermediary between those who are continuing to engage in an active riding relationship with horses, and how can I help that become even more compassionate, even more refined? How can I help the human be able to clarify their communication and coordination so that the horses continue to have, um, a friend of mine says that the horses get a better deal, basically, right? It's a really ancient, special relationship that horses teach humans how to feel. It's a nonverbal relationship. If I'm working with horses all day, I don't have to talk. And there's a beauty in that. We're communicating with the language of the heart. And again, that is not necessarily relegated to being on their backs at all. There's a lot of beautiful things that can happen just being in a field with them, partnering with them at liberty. That's not using any, tack, any halters or leads or things like that. Um, but again, I've really gone deep into this inquiry. How can we still be in right relationship? There are people who are doing it, so maybe I can somehow help again midwife a transition or a translation so that we can continue to have it done in the best possible way, honoring some ethical standards.
Well, Kansas, I can totally feel how considerate of a person you are, and I'm very grateful to have this time with you. Thanks for being here. If people are interested in finding out more about your work, what's the best way for um, them to learn more?
Well, I also want to thank Kathy Woods because she's actually my connection to Yogaville. And Kathy Woods Yoga, I met, in the equestrian industry. We're colleagues, and we both have a Vedic path as well as this work that we do in the equestrian world. And so my particular website is circuscowgirl.com, and there's also a Facebook page, and it's all quite new. I really didn't have any social media presence at all, except in the last year. But that's a way that people can connect with me for online programs as well as in-person clinics and retreats. And the collaboration that I have with Kathy to come to Yogaville in April is going to be a beautiful spring opportunity to really reset and renew, recharge, reinvigorate our practice, our connection to ourselves, our connection to the natural world. I've talked about so much now that it's not just relegated to horsemanship or equines, but it's really connecting to nature in all ways, and that they really help us learn about ourselves. Everything's giving us feedback, right?
Mm.
So any of these course offerings, they will have a mixture of people who are interested in learning about horsemanship, as well as people who might be mental health professionals or those who are just sincere spiritual seekers, those who are looking at how to understand mindfulness, awareness practices, because there's nothing that can really replicate that feeling of you got to get in your body and feel what it's like to be aware when you're in the presence of a large animal.
Mm.
So there's a lot of beautiful opportunities and offerings that are here in 2025 that I'd be excited for you and your community to be able to check out.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person, your program coming up. Thanks so much again for doing this.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. I hope you have a great day. Thanks to all your listeners and watchers. And yeah, Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this content and think others might as well, please feel free to share and subscribe.